Hello and welcome to the National Debate. I'm Madhavdas G. Viewers, America and Iran are engaged in a war that has destabilized the entirety of the Middle East. The world is forced to pick sides, and several nations with large populations of Indians have been dragged into a conflict they didn't see coming. Back home in India, concerns are growing over the manner in which the war is coming closer and closer to the Indian coastline. The American offensive on Iran's naval vessel has now also put the spotlight on India. While the Indian Navy has engaged in rescue operations, India is maintaining a very measured stand over the ongoing conflict. For the Indian government, the priority remains ensuring steady supplies of crude and gas imports. But as the war escalates, is India prepared for the fallout? And are we ready for the global consequences of several world powers entering this conflict? Let's quickly introduce our panel. Joining us today, we have Abhijit Iyer Mitra, Senior Fellow of IPCS. With us also here is Air Vice Marshal P.K. Srivastava, who's a defense expert. Veena Sikri, former High Commissioner of India to Bangladesh, also joins us. Joining us also from outside the studio are Dr. Jeffrey Gunter, former U.S. Ambassador. Peter Kuznick is author and professor of history and director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University. Fred Weir is Russian expert and journalist. Joining us also with us is Brigadier General Yosef Kuperwasser, former head of Military Intelligence Research Division. Also with us is Ashok Kumar, Associate Professor of Political Economy at the Birkbeck University of London. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Let's quickly take you through what exactly has happened over the last few days. And this is what has transpired as far as our first talking point is concerned. And this is concerning Iranian warship Iris Dana. Now, we've seen how a U.S. submarine has struck its torpedoes and, in fact, taken down this warship. This was struck off the Sri Lankan coast. It was returning from Milan 2026. That's a naval exercise that India had hosted, and many countries, including the U.S., were supposed to participate in that particular exercise. Let's quickly get in fact, the next set of details as far as this is concerned and why India should be concerned. The first reason is that Iris Dana was India's naval guest. That's a point that has been made by the Iranian side as well. The Iranian sailors paraded here in India at Visakhapatnam. The warship was here on India's invite to participate in that exercise. It was torpedoed by US in the Indian Ocean, a region that India said is its sphere of influence. Iran drags India into the war narrative with the statement of Arakchi, the foreign minister, comes in. But why can't India be faulted? Legally speaking, the last port of call was in Sri Lanka, not here in India. The ship had departed off the coast of Vizag several days before the conflict began and therefore ceased to be a guest of the Indian Navy in that sense, is what we are being told. And Indian Navy thus bears no responsibility for this attack, and neither did Dana or the Iranian government seek India's support in terms of security or otherwise. The incident happened in international waters, is what we are being told as well. Now, India has also stepped in to aid Iris Dana. The Iranian vessel, of course, had sent a distress signal, following which India had too participated. The alert was received by the MRCC there in Colombo. A long-range maritime patrol aircraft was launched. An aircraft with air-droppable life rafts was on standby as well. INS Telangani diverted to assist in the rescue, and INS Ikshak sailed from Kochi to assist. Joint India-Sri Lanka SAR coordination was in fact put into place. Let's quickly take this across to our panelists joining us at this point of time. Is this an issue of concern, Air Marshal P.K. Srivastava? And is it really a valid thing to say that somewhere or the other, this is an incident that concerns India because this has happened in India's neighborhood without India's knowledge, and this leads to serious questions about what really and how far this war can go?
So Madhav is absolutely right that there's a concern here because Indian Ocean region is supposed to be our kind of watch in a way. But if you legally speak or militarily, it was not in our sovereign waters, which are supposed to be extending up to 12 nautical miles, and it was not closer to us. As you rightly pointed out, it was maybe 100 or 150 nautical miles away from us, and it was 40, 50 miles, nautical miles away from Sri Lanka. But the question is, by the time war started, it is a commissioned aircraft, ship of Iranian Navy. So by that, it was in, and the Iran is under active combat as far as US, Israel and Iran are concerned. So in that sense, being in international water, it can become a legitimate target, military target. So that way you cannot deny it. And India, we are emoting about it because a few days back it was our guest, and the guest has gone. We have seen the parade, so there are a lot of emotions about it.
So we do have a moral responsibility, not a legal one. That's the crux of what you're saying.
Not moral, not even moral. In what way we are morally responsible, I really don't understand.
But then why did the Navy launch its rescue operations then if you're not responsible?
So that's a rescue operation. That's supposed to be, it's not a moral responsibility. It's helping somebody. Had it been any other ship, we would have helped the same way.
Okay.
We've done it for others also. So it's not that there's a moral responsibility. Moral responsibility if you are supposed to be protecting, but there's a concern because IO are supposed to be there, and we have a maritime domain awareness agreement with US.
Okay.
But that restricts only up to the point that in case something which is concerning us, they will share the information with us, but if they have their own combat information, it's unlikely to be shared.
Let me bring in other panelists as well. Dr. Jeffrey Gunta, this is of concern to us here in India for two reasons. Primarily, what if there was an Indian vessel in the vicinity? What if there was some kind of damage caused to an Indian, say even a private ship, not even a government ship for that matter? Point number one, India was not informed. Point number two, there's also a violation of international protocols, including the Geneva Convention, which state that once such an attack takes place, you have to help those who are injured or who, whose lives can be saved. That has not happened in this case. Your response to those 2 points?
My response is the civilized world should be celebrating the execution of the way that the United States and Israel are in the process of defeating terrorists. The terrorist country, the greatest sponsor. This was a military frigate of the Iranian military, the Iranian Navy in international waters. I understand the sentimentality of them parading in great India, your amazing country, your amazing democracy. But there is a war that's being executed right now. It was legal. It was correct. It was effective. It was one of the few recent torpedoing of a military ship that we've seen in time. So I think we should all be celebrating the way this is going. And like I've always said, the United States and India are bound by our common values. And I can tell you the Ayatollah and his thugs do not share our great common values between the two of us.
All right. It's, Veena Sikri, do you agree with that contention that, the Ayatollah, the Iran regime don't share the common values? India is a democracy and therefore it should side with us. But is that a very simplistic way of looking at it? Because India has ties with US, it has close ties with Israel, and it has had historical close ties with Iran as well. So India cannot be seen picking a side.
No, absolutely. I think in keeping with India's foreign policy based on strategic autonomy, India is not involved in this situation at all. It's only that there are two factors here. One is that the ship was at Visakhapatnam for the naval exercises and had already left Indian shores and Indian international Indian waters long before the war began. Number one. Number two, in the Indian Ocean, India has a great presence, but it had nothing to do with the US torpedo attack on the Iranian vessel which took place off the coast of Sri Lanka, but in international waters. So there is absolutely no involvement of any kind, and India has, in keeping with our human HADR, our disaster relief assistance and everything, we have been helping the people who've been affected by this tragedy. But I think the significant fact, of course, is the widening of the conflict between USA and Israel on one side and Iran on the other. The widening of the conflict and bringing it into the Indian Ocean is a matter of great significance, and India is certainly studying that very carefully, and we are certainly going to step up our awareness in the Indian Ocean region because it affects everything. It affects trade, it affects any kind of other activity that the Indian Navy has in the Indian Ocean, providing disaster relief and help to the vessels there. So obviously it means a greater step up of India's awareness of this conflict. But India is not involved in any way, and India has no responsibility either to USA or to Iran in this matter. We are completely in keeping with our policy of strategic autonomy. We have behaved correctly, and there is absolutely no responsibility of any kind for India.
Right. Let me bring in Peter Kuznick. Peter Kuznick, in the year 2021, India had objected to the US Navy's freedom of navigation operation inside the exclusive economic zone near Lakshadweep Islands. Now, with the US attack on the Iranian vessel that has once again occurred in the Indian Ocean region, is this a bit of a recurring problem? Because these are repeated military actions taking place in what India considers its own sphere of influence. Peter Kuznick.
I think the issue is bigger. The fact that India, as a democracy and a moral force in the world, as the leader of the global South, has not taken steps to condemn this illegal, immoral war is, to me, this very, very disturbing. I mean, the previous guest said the civilized world should be celebrating. The civilized world should be appalled by this. This is against the international law. It's against the U.S. Constitution, and it's against morality. The U.S. is in bed with the butcher of Gaza. You know, the U.S. should be taking a very, very different role in the world. And so the fact that the U.S. did this outrage in the Indian Ocean is tiny compared with the fact that the U.S. is the bully of the world. I mean, since Trump's taken office again, the U.S. has bombed 7 different countries. The U.S. kidnapped the leader of Venezuela. The U.S. was shooting down boats in the Caribbean. The U.S. is threatening to invade Greenland and Panama and Colombia and other countries. This is a country out of control with a leader who says the only thing that can limit him is his own morality, his own mind. He's not going to be constrained by international law. I mean, this is appalling, and the fact that India has not spoken out more strongly is the real issue. This is trivial by comparison.
Okay. Abhijit, you want to answer that? India has not spoken out. India has not taken a position. Peter Kuznick objecting to that. I'm also going to bring in Ambassador Gunta on the larger questions that US needs to answer. But Abhijit first.
This morning, I was at the Raisina Dialogue and I shook hands with the Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister. Now, he didn't seem terribly outraged by India's position. So I don't know why people are taking offense for Iran when Iran itself isn't taking offense for itself, you see. This is trying to be more loyal than the king is to the king. I'm not going to get into this. This is a rhetorical point, number one. Number two, let's look at legality. Was America within its legal rights to do what it did? Yes, because on the high seas, this was technically in the contiguous zone, which is somewhere between territorial waters and the high seas. Is it legal if you have declared war to sink a ship? Yes, you are. There is the whole 1939 Battle of Rio Plate where the Graf Spee went into, the Montevideo harbor to avoid Allied ships and things like that, New Zealand and UK ships. There is that. There is also the case of the sinking of the Chonan, the South Korean ship that was sunk in disputed waters by North Korea, which technically was legal because there was only an armistice. Technically, the North and South are still at war. Now, we have to understand, you brought up the issue of India protesting freedom of navigation ops. Remember, India has declared that 12 to 24 nautical mile zone, which is the contiguous zone, as part of its territorial waters. We have extended territoriality to that zone as per our law. Sri Lanka has not.
Okay.
So technically, being purely legal in all of this, did they have a right to sink the ship? Yes. Second, is it our responsibility? Because for the Indian opposition, that seems to be the point, that these were our guests. They could have any time declared an emergency and come back into an Indian port. They did not do that. They had every right to seek refuge in an Indian port, like the Graf Spee did in Montevideo harbor in 1939. They did not. Third is, if a guest comes to my house and, he's like 20 kilometers away, and he gets into a car crash, say a deliberate car crash or a mafia hit or something like that, how's that my responsibility, bro? That's like really not my responsibility, So I don't know where this is coming from. I think we need to get our legal concepts a bit clear out here. Murderer of Gaza, this and that, these are rhetorical points. I'm not going to get into that.
Okay. Let me bring in Ashok Kumar, Associate Professor of the University of Birkbeck. Ashok Kumar, the question is that legally speaking, India cannot be faulted. As per international law, there is no reason that India can be held accountable, yes. But there are those who are raising the moral question about having been a guest of India, and India has, put out its own statements, following this incident. In fact, India has even visited the Iranian embassy here in the national capital. Your response to what's being stated by the previous speaker, Ashok Kumar.
I mean, obviously, I don't think the previous speaker knows what he's talking about. It's obvious that there's no legal authority the Americans had for torpedoing this ship because the war itself has not been sanctioned. It has no UN authorization. And Marco Rubio came out and said, and the Pentagon has testified to the House that there was no threat posed by Iran. So the war itself is illegal. And yeah, I want to second Peter's point. What moral authority? Israel and America have been committing genocide for the last 2 years. There are warrants out for war crimes against the leaders of Israel. So yes, that is a legal prerogative of the ICC. There's also other violations potentially. We were talking about if India might not have legal culpability, but India should have come out and said they had come as guests here. Was the frigate weaponized? Were there weapons on board? There's no clarification of that. I mean, the previous foreign secretary said that it would have likely not had weapons on it, and it was well outside the Persian Gulf. It was well outside the zone of conflict. That then could be a violation of the laws of the armed conflict at the sea, because is it a legitimate target if it's not even part of the war, and has the war even been sanctioned? So both morally and legally, I think there's deep questions here. But the fact that India hasn't made even a statement about this, hasn't sent any condolences, and the fact that the Americans didn't even rescue the people that were putting out distress signs. I mean, even the Germans during the Second World War would rescue, not because of law, because of a common decency and honor. They would rescue people. The Americans didn't even have that. So it's shameful all around.
Okay. Abhijit, quick response from you, then I go across to others.
I was under the impression you were bringing serious academics here, not clowns. Please understand, a UN authorization is not a requirement.
No personal comments. Let's not make this personal.
No, let's be very clear.
I'm requesting both of you.
He is a clown. He is a worthless clown.
One by one. Let's stick to the subject at hand.
Is not
no personal comments, please.
War. I really need to wonder how this man became a professor, number one. Second, unrestricted international warfare means that you can.
No personal comments. I've just said that. Please, let's restrain ourselves. Let's stick. It's a serious issue we are discussing. No need to make personal comments at all. I'm requesting both of you. Otherwise, I'll have to lower both your fingers. One by one now.
Trash. Now, General Belgrano is the one known example of this, which Margaret Thatcher ordered attacked when it was outside the engagement zone. Why? Because she had already fixed the engagement zone, and the British attacked it when it was moving away from the engagement zone. That doesn't mean it's illegal. Okay, the laws of war are very clear on this. Neither is UN authorization required, nor was the sinking of the Belgrano illegal. You can go in for unrestricted submarine warfare. You can go in for unrestricted warfare. If America chooses to do it, yes, it's perfectly fine. Show me the clause which says it isn't.
Ashok Kumar.
Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. You can't just unilaterally go to war. There was no threat of imminent danger. There was no UN authorization. This man doesn't know anything.
This man is a clown.
All you have to have is a big Twitter account and they put you on television.
What does this clown do?
No. Language, please. Language. This is not done. Let me bring in other panelists now. Brigadier General Yusuf Kupawasa, I want you to come in on this. The question that many are raising is about the role as far as, the spread of the theater of conflict is concerned. And this is very, very concerning. There's a war going on in Middle East. There is Iran that is attacking, several countries in the Middle East. On the other hand, you have now US, which is attacking an Iranian ship in the Indian Ocean. If the theater of conflict spreads like this, you'll end up bringing in other countries into a war that they don't even want to be a part of.
Well, the attack on the ship was carried out in international waters, so no other country should have been involved because of that. And it's a part of the war between the United States and Iran. And the United States has made it clear that they intend to destroy the Iranian Navy. And this ship is part of the Iranian Navy. It just happened to be outside of Iran because of something very strange. Why does India host a ship of the Iranian Navy for joint exercise? That sounds to me very strange. After all,
there's a US ship also that was supposed to be part of it, which pulled out, USS Pinckney. And that's India's business who they want to invite. How can anybody decide what India wants to do?
No, we don't decide. You can do whatever you like, but I'm questioning the logic behind inviting a ship of the Navy of the major sponsor of terrorism in the world to participate in a drill.
That's Israel's perspective, isn't it? That cannot be forced upon India. There are at least, I think, about 60 countries that participated in this exercise.
I'm just asking a question. I'm not forcing anything. I'm just asking a question. I think that international community should isolate the major sponsor of terrorism and put pressure on it in order to change its way and not host it. That's what I think. But of course, you're entitled to do whatever you like.
You want to comment on this, Marshal Srivastav, because who India chooses to host as part of a maritime exercise or any other military exercise, that's India's sovereign right. And and the fact is that this exercise also finished several days before the conflict began.
See, Madhav, one thing is very sure, that what India is doing is India's right, and it should do. It's a sovereign right of India, who it calls, doesn't call. And then making a statement that you shouldn't call this nation because it's supposed to be a kind of terrorist state. By that logic, we should say Field Marshal Moni shouldn't be hosted by White House.
Absolutely.
So absolutely. So that's not the logic. We didn't object to that because that's what nations do. They do whatever is their sovereign right in their own interest. But this point that it was a legitimate military target, I fully agree with this, because in international waters, and if the war is on between US, Israel and Iran, then US Navy has full rights to torpedo it.
Yeah.
It has done that. Of course, later on you're supposed to be saving, those are conventions, but they are not laws. If you are a commissioned ship, you are a legitimate target wherever you are.
Okay.
And it's an active combat.
But were they fully armed? Were they battle ready? Because there's some doubt
it doesn't
about when
matter.
you do this exercise.
It doesn't matter. You're degrading the war-waging capacity of the enemy. So you're not concerned, at least a ship there, whether it has weapons or no weapons. You mean to say, if I fly over Iran, it's a fighter aircraft, it doesn't have weapons, so nobody will shoot at it. No, it doesn't happen that way.
Okay, let me bring in Fred Weir on this. Fred Weir, it's a legitimate target, and therefore there's no question about whatever happening is, any legal issues over whatever has happened there as far as taking out of that Iranian warship is concerned. Where do you stand on this, Fred Weir?
At a very bare minimum, it's clear the United States didn't consider Indian sensitivities when they decided to hit that ship right there, right near India, right near Sri Lanka. They are, and it's emblematic of the way they are fighting this war, the decapitating of Iranian leadership, waging of a surprise attack in the midst of peace negotiations, which were apparently showing progress. This is a pretty ruthless way that the Americans and Israelis are waging war, and they're not, and it is a dangerous thing. I don't know morality and legality and all that, but I can tell you that in Moscow, where they themselves are waging a war against a neighbor, and they've been accused of all kinds of aggression, quite rightly, they're shocked at the way this war is unfolding, and the way it started, and the way the Americans seem to be gazifying Iran. This is something new and shocking, and we should all really be worried about it.
Okay, let me bring in fact, Dr. Jeffrey Gunter on this. Dr. Jeffrey Gunter, 2 points. And I want to take up on this entire question about the USS Pinckney, which was scheduled to participate in the same joint military exercise of Milan 2026, but chose to cancel at the last moment. So the optics of the US, pulling out of one particular event and then targeting an Iranian ship that was supposed to participate in the same event, that doesn't look very good. Number one. Number two, someone earlier mentioned about the role that US is playing. Already President Trump has hinted out that Cuba is going to be next. So where is this all going to end?
Well, so far we've had a great outcome. And to some of our panelists, I would say your amazing Prime Minister Modi argues against you. Before the conflict started, he said India is a friend of Israel now and forever. So, and that was after Gaza and these terms of Gazification and the, what I see obvious as a physician, TDS, Trump derangement syndrome of some of the panelists here as they describe, Netanyahu and Trump's behavior. The reality is the optics are perfect. America is standing up for democracy. They are executing this war flawlessly, and they are ridding the world of a 40-year tyrant and thugs that we've been seeing destroying the Iranian people. And I might say to our panelists, when you see the Iranian women celebrating in the streets of Tehran, why are esteemed panelists from such great institutions and universities not celebrating with them? It's shameful. I stand with the women of Iran. I stand with freedom. I stand with democracy. And we should all on this panel be celebrating the success, not wringing our hands of a military target taken out of action off the shore in international waters. Let's celebrate with the Iranian women. Let's not.
There are several Iranians who are also standing with the Ayatollah when those processions happened as well. So we can't take this in just one perspective, Mr. Gunta. And also when you talk about India being a friend of Israel, yes, but India is a friend of US also, despite the fact that you slap 50% tariffs. But that doesn't mean that we won't secure our interests with other countries.
Absolutely, and that's your sovereign right. And that's the greatness of two great democracies, is you all have your right to pursue what's in your national best interest. But as a U.S. diplomat, retired, let me tell you, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. So though India might not be outwardly cheering and rooting for the outcome that we're seeing unfold right now, there's a lot going on behind the scenes. And let's face it, India has to be India first. Make India great again. The United States is MAGA. Make America great again. And I got news for you. We're also going to see MIGA. Make Iran great again. And that's being executed right now.
Okay, who's going to drive that? Is it going to be President Trump driving Make Iran Great Again? I don't know at the moment. But let's quickly look at the next big talking point over here. And that is, of course, when it comes to the entire issue related to oil. And this has the entire world worried because the global economy could be impacted, as well as the fact that, of course, about the Indians who are there in the Gulf as well. So two very important reasons why the Gulf matters to India, not just the proximity, but also the large number, close to 1 crore Indians who are living in the Gulf. If we can quickly get the next set of graphics, 118.7 billion remittances to India. 38% share of the total remittances that come into India is from the Gulf. 19.2% is UAE's contribution to these remittances, the single largest. Let's also look at the impact sector-wise. $70 billion of crude and petroleum imports that come into India. And of course, the disruptions could push up inflation. The total imports, of course, at $98.7 billion. $9.8 billion of LNG imports. 68.4% of India's LNG comes from West Asia. This is key for fertilizers, power plants, as well as city gas, so on and so forth. There's also $13.9 billion of LPG imports. 46.9% of India's LPG purchases, the main cooking fuel for millions of Indians, comes in from here. $3.7 billion of fertilizer imports also. The impact on farmers and fertilizer availability could, of course, affect lakhs, if not crores of Indians. $6.8 billion worth of diamonds imported, 40.6% of India's total diamond imports, crucial for Surat's polishing industry as well. Now, this is as far as diamond trade is concerned. Let's quickly get in the next set of graphics. Some of India's exports could be hit as well. India's basmati rice trade could be at risk because 25% is exported to Iran. There's also, of course, exports to Iraq at 20% over here. There's also 2 million plus tons that are shipped to Iran and Iraq every year. 1.2 billion worth of basmati exported to Iran, and of course the trade valued at $2 billion plus. Basmati exports to Iraq may face disruption as well, and uncertainty could affect trade across Central Asia. There's also tea exports to Iran that may take a hit. Let's take a look at some of the other points. $7 billion worth exported in 2024-25, and on oil routes, the limited exposure to the Strait of Hormuz is one aspect. Russian oil imports are going to continue. On February, we've seen 1.04 million barrels a day of purchase. On LPG as well, the supply at the moment is comfortable, says the government. Refineries have been told to boost their output, and petrochemicals, LPG, can be diverted as well. On LNG, this is what India is saying. The LNG supplies can be reprioritized. All procurement options are open, and a robust supply management is in place when it comes to LNG. On energy policy overall, India decides its energy sources. The government is answerable to consumers, and energy policy mantra is India first. Let me go right back to Jeffrey Gunta. Dr. Jeffrey Gunta, the point is this. All of this, of course, is happening. The world is concerned about global fuel prices. It could have an inflationary impact globally. But what is of concern here in India and has become a bit of a domestic issue is the way that it's been phrased by the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent when he comes out and says that US has allowed India to purchase Russian oil for the period of a month. So many are asking, what is this kind of terminology? I mean, he might not be a diplomat, but he has to be clearly made sensitized as to what India's own concerns and sensitivities are when it comes to the purchase of oil and discussing it in the public domain like this.
Well, I think it's in light of this military operation being executed and the full understanding of our great Secretary of Treasury understanding that what the Iranians are trying to do is close the Strait of Hormuz. And what did he do? He made exceptions. He opened up oil for the Indian people. And again, that's what you do for great allies and friends like India. It's smart. I understand the implications. I understand on one hand,
but the fact is we never stopped buying from Russia.
On the other hand, you're not. I get it. I understand your point. But also there's a practical aspect to this. And the practical aspect is taking care of the Indian people and making sure that you are not hurting the Indian people as a consequence of us crushing the Iranians. And that's what our great Secretary of Treasury do. This is what you do for friends, and India is a friend of America, and that's exactly what we're doing. So I hope they keep the oil flowing until the Strait of Hormuz is completely open. Iran is gone. There's a new alliance between India, Israel, and America, and our fellow Gulf neighbors there. And there's greatness on the way.
I'm going to get an Indian panelist to respond to you on the points you made as far as Scott Bessent is concerned. But one of the points that's repeatedly coming in from US's side, I'm not able to understand, Dr. Gunta. If you're going to keep crushing every regime that comes into power in Iran, whether it's this set of ayatollahs, the next set of ayatollahs, who are you going to talk to? And how are you going to let the country function?
Oh, we're gonna talk to great countries. Look at the greatness that's going on in Venezuela right now. There's celebration in the street. The Iranian people are great, amazing people. They have a historic society there. They're not a country that's torn by sectarian violence like we've seen in some of the other countries, whether it's Libya, whether it's Iraq. This is a great country. We will have great relations.
Is that comparable at all? Where civilian targets such as schools have been clearly targeted over here. Let me bring in Peter Kuznick to respond to that. Is the Venezuelan situation comparable at all to Iran? Peter Kuznick.
No, and his view of history is very distorted. The U.S. first overthrew the government in Iran in 1953. Mossadegh was very popular. He's a Time magazine Man of the Year in 1951. The U.S. ambassador to Iran wrote back to Washington that Mossadegh had the support of between 95 and 98% of the Iranian people. And the U.S. went in there, a CIA coup, and overthrew him and replaced him with the hated Shah and Savak. And now Trump says he wants to have a hand in choosing the next Ayatollah, next supreme leader in Iran. You know, the U.S. has a sordid history. As an American, I've seen my country lied into war time and time again, but never with so much popular opposition. Barely a quarter of the American people supported this, but Trump doesn't care because he's like a bull in a china shop. You know, so no comparison to Venezuela, but there's a lot of comparison to Vietnam, to Iraq, to Libya, to what all these outrages the U.S. has perpetrated over the years. And I hope my Indian friends understand that and don't and speak out strongly against this in terms of international law and morality.
Let me bring in Ambassador Veena Sikri on that point. India's position, what should it be publicly? Quite a big and a difficult balancing act. But the messaging coming from the US is certainly going to be very challenging. Because if you have statements such as US allows India to purchase Russian oil, the question is, when did we ever stop purchasing Russian oil? It may have reduced over the last year or so, but that doesn't mean we have stopped buying Russian oil in the first place.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think that our statement on this matter was quite clear at the time when the interim framework on the trade deal between USA and India was being talked about and negotiated. We said very clearly that India has the sovereign right to decide its own energy security issues, and India will take its own decisions on where it's going to purchase its petroleum and petroleum products from, depending on its own energy security concerns. So we had said very clearly that we're not going to be guided by any particular country on whom we can buy from and whom we cannot buy from. So I think the wording of Secretary of the Treasury Besant's statement has come as a bit of surprise and quite unwarranted, I think, in many ways, the way it has been worded. But overall, I think, Madhav, I'd like to draw one point to draw attention to an important point, that yes, for India, the large number of people of Indian origin and Indians living in the Gulf and including in Saudi Arabia are a matter of priority for India, and we will always have their concerns at our heart. And now that if their safety is in danger in any way, we will look at it very seriously. There is also the trade concern, and that is why we have said very clearly that we are in favor of dialogue and diplomacy. You've seen that Prime Minister Modi has been in touch with all the leaders. Even our External Affairs Minister spoke to the Foreign Minister of Iran, and then the Minister of State came to India. He's in India. So all these matters show that India, because of its good relations with all the parties to the conflict, is able to keep in touch with each and every one of them, and is pushing in favor of dialogue and diplomacy and cessation of hostilities in this situation. We are very concerned about the escalation and the bringing it into the Indian Ocean, as we spoke about earlier. But now the overall focus has to be on cessation of hostilities, on dialogue and diplomacy, and bringing an end, rather than arguing about this legal law, that legal law. We have to get everybody to the table and bring it to an end. And I think that India, on behalf of the Global South, has taken a very important lead in this direction. Our Prime Minister is the only leader who has been in touch with all, whether it is UAE or Israel or USA or Iran or Qatar and others. We've been in touch with all the leaders, looking at every aspect. The concern about our Indian citizens, the concern about our trade issues and the movement to the Straits of Hormuz, and the concern about bringing this situation to an end before it escalates. And everybody's talking about, the World War III emerging from this imbroglio that we are in. It is a matter of great concern to us and to all countries of the world. It should be too. We must be in favor of peace. We're not arguing whether you're on this side or that side. That's not the issue today. The issue is to bring it to an end as soon as possible. Right. To bring everybody to the table for dialogue. There were talks going on in Oman. Oman had brokered talks. They were going on in Geneva till the 28th, almost till the 28th of February. Right. And then suddenly, as one analyst said, the problem is not that there was a breakdown in the talk, but there was a breakthrough. Israel attacked Iran, and America stepped in as well. So I think this has to be looked at.
Let me bring in fact, India has had historical ties with all of these countries. Let me bring in fact, Brigadier General Yusuf Kupawasa. But Brigadier General Yusuf Kupawasa, the question that many would be asking at this point of time is this. The Strait of Hormuz, there are about 37 vessels that are stuck there. Now, both sides have hardened their positions. Some say that it's open, some say that it's not. Effectively, no company wants to move their crude oil at this point of time because they just don't want to bear the losses. The question is, as much as it's on Iran, it's also on Israel in terms of responsibility, because Israel is the one that has started this conflict. How quickly will you end it and ensure that this does not, disrupt global supply chains and have an inflationary pressure globally speaking?
Well, we did not start it, and we did it by ourselves. We did it together with the United States in order to make the world a better place and a safer place. That's the problem that we have. Unlike what some people here claim, that the Iranians were showing readiness to adopt flexible positions on the nuclear issue, this is exactly the opposite of what happened. The Iranians refused to show any flexibility. They insisted on having the capability to produce nuclear weapons. And that's why we went to war. And they have this enormous amount of ballistic missiles that threaten everybody in the Middle East, and this has to be dealt with. That's what we are trying to do. And yes, for a short period of time, there's going to be some disruption of the flow of oil from the Gulf. I hope it's going to be a very short period of time. We are doing our best in order to shorten the war. But we have to be also aware that the war is going to last as long as it takes in order to reach our goals. And the Iranian regime doesn't volunteered to step down from power, so we have to keep fighting against them.
Okay.
So that should be able to win in the shortest period available option.
Okay, Ashok Kumar, you want to respond to that? The fact is that Witkoff and others are on record to say that Iran has spoken about how it's developed several nuclear weapons, and who's to say what Iran can't do if it has become a nuclear weapon power? Perhaps things could have gone further out of control. US says there was a very specific and a definite threat emanating from there.
Well, the Pentagon says that there was no threat. There was no imminent threat. And Marco Rubio came out and said there's been an imminent threat for 47 years. That's by definition not an imminent threat. And Israel is the one that pushed Trump to break the Obama agreement that they had with Iran, which Iran was following. Israel is the one that pushed to bomb the previous negotiations. They bombed them in the middle of it. And this current negotiations, when they had a deal, they bombed them with Oman. And the idea of nuclear weapons, Israel has nuclear weapons. America is the only country in the world that's used nuclear weapons. By that definition, why can't a country unilaterally bomb those countries? And so in the American...
Are you advocating for a nuclear war? What are you saying?
I'm not. I'm saying if you apply the same principles, how is Israel allowed to have nuclear weapons, but Iran can't develop nuclear weapons? And you can say that countries are allowed to bomb Iran if they're developing nuclear weapons. There's no indication that they did. But where's the morality in that? Israel has 500 nuclear warheads that can bomb any country in the region.
I don't think anyone has officially declared that Israel has those nuclear weapons, but Abhijit wants to respond to the point that you made. Abhijit.
Israel never signed the NPT. You know, the ban on nuclear weapons is when you sign the NPT. And when you're not one of the 5 member states. Israel never signed it. This is the problem, you see. Clueless people really shouldn't be talking about this. 2-3 other points very quickly. Do you remember there was a law called, there still is a US law called the CATSA? Now, CATSA was a law that prevented India from getting American weapons if he bought Russian weapons. It was a statute law. What happened was the Americans gave us 2 waivers, and then it's become a permanent waiver. We can buy Russian weapons. Where is the law here? When Scott Bessent says I've given India a waiver, this is like saying, you know, I don't own Times Now, but I've given Madhav a waiver to host this program. You know, I can claim literally anything under the sun. Second point, very insidious point that was made, that the Americans got rid of Mossadegh in 1953. They did not. Operation Ajax, which was the American coup attempt, failed, and the Shah, under the power given to him by the 1949 Constitution, which replaced the 1906 Constitution, the Qajar Constitution, dismissed Mossadegh, as was his power under the Constitution. We need to be very clear about historical facts.
Okay, Peter Guznik wants to respond to you on that. Peter Guznik.
I'm hearing this rewriting of history, you know, without any truth or any knowledge. But the previous comment, this last one is irrelevant, but the previous comment that Iran was building a nuclear weapon and that this was justified is based on lies. Trump claimed 3 things when he first went into this. Number 1, that Iran had started reprocessing uranium again. The IAEA says that's a lie. Number 2, that Iran was building a nuclear weapon again, which after Trump says he obliterated their nuclear program, they hadn't gotten access to it again. There's no evidence to support that. The CIA says Iran gave up its nuclear program in 2003, and you know, and then under the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, which Obama negotiated in 2015, Iran was reprocessing up to 3.67%. They'd mothballed their centrifuges. They shipped their highly enriched uranium out of the country, and then Trump blew that up. You know, and then they were processing up to 60%, which I didn't like. The last thing I want to see is Iran getting a nuclear weapon, because then everybody in that region is going to go nuclear, and that would be a disaster. And the third big lie was that Iran would soon have a intercontinental ballistic missile that could hit the United States.
Jeffrey Gunter, I want you to answer this question. You know, are we looking at a 2003 situation when US went into Iraq under the pretext of weapons of mass destruction, and none of them were ever found out? Are we looking at exactly the same thing repeating again in 2026?
Absolutely not. The Iranians for 40 years have been saying that they want to destroy America, destroy Israel. Their pursuit of nuclear weapons has been very transparent, blatant. The Israelis have all the evidence to show it. They refused to have nuclear inspectors in there. They were given the opportunity by Witkoff and Kushner to have nuclear energy, and they refused it. Why? They want a bomb. They want drones. They want terrorism. They want missiles to prevent the international community and America and Israel from preventing them from having a nuclear weapon. Those days are gone. The Ayatollah's gone. And the free world is much safer, and they will be celebrating not only in America, not only in Israel, but also in India. And the women of Iran, I suggest that our panelists with severe TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, should be celebrating with them.
Who has a derangement syndrome? I don't want to get into, but quick closing comment. We're almost out of time. Ajit Mitra.
Remember the nuclear deal with North Korea? Bill Clinton gave them 2 reactors that were meant to be proliferation-proof reactors, it was advertised. Where is North Korea today, Madhav? Please do tell me. You know, all these agreements that come about, they have sunset clauses and things like that. You can always cheat on them. There is no such thing as a cast iron agreement. Ultimately, it depends. Every country has a sovereign right to determine where its security lies.
All right, we'll have to wrap it up there. I'd like to thank all our panelists for joining us. Abhijit Iyer Mitra, Air Vice Marshal P.K. Srivastava, Veena Sikri, Dr. Jeffrey Gunter, Peter Kuznick, Fred Beer, Brigadier General Joseph Kupawasa, and Ashok Kumar. Thanks so much for joining us on this edition of the National Debate.